Well, welcome everyone. Thank you very much for joining another Meet the Gurus. As many of you know, Meet the Gurus is dedicated to technology, business, and entrepreneurship, and how those fields have converged over the past years in an exciting way. Meet the Gurus is sponsored by Starweaver in the interest of spreading ideas, knowledge, and insights in short form of less than 30 minutes. And today we have the pleasure of having Tom Giordano. Tom, join us, and thank you very much for taking the time.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's an honor to be here, and I'm looking forward to chatting with you about my career and listening to any of the questions that any of your viewers have.
Great. Well, today's discussion is all about making transitions, and primarily we're talking about transition from technology to business career, but everyone seems to be moving in both directions. But before we get into it, I'd like to really understand a little about, let's help people understand a little about you, how you got into business from technology, and your journey and what it's been like.
Sure. Thanks again, Paul and Starweaver. As I discussed earlier with Paul, my career actually started totally in the engineering field. I have an undergraduate and graduate degree in engineering, which I got in Philadelphia, and subsequently went on to the military and became an officer in the Signal Corps, and also doing electrical engineering stuff. I just loved engineering. And just as some of you who may be engineers were a little suspicious about business and sales and marketing folks in general. Ham radio operator, built my own TV, all those sorts of things. My first real job out of school and out of the military was with CBS Laboratories here in Connecticut. I worked with a couple of, actually a Nobel laureate there, and also with the inventor of the cardio microphone, and then subsequently got a job at Philips Healthcare, which is where I worked for roughly 29, 30 years. So the first 15 years of that career was in engineering, doing what I love, designing things. I had the pleasure of actually working in the very early days of Pixar when they had started, working on a project to convert or use a lot of their technology for putting three-dimensional images together, CT scanning. Got the pleasure of meeting and working with Steve Jobs himself, which was a real honor. Worked on projects where I was in Japan, bringing over the first digital equivalent or replacement for film-based radiography products, and a ton of other rather prestigious projects. And that roughly took half of my career, roughly 15 years. So I was just fat, dumb, and happy. I went from just a little drone engineer up to running the engineering department. And then I guess I learned the hard way that one day the CEO came down to me and said, well, we got bad news here. This is a Dutch company, and they told us to shut down the engineering facility, and they're moving what little engineering we had here in the United States over there, and it's in the what I would like you to do is to shut down engineering, and don't worry, I'll take care of you. So being a good military officer, I saluted and managed to do one of the most difficult things in my career, which was basically eliminating the engineering department. I can still remember the CEO then coming to me just after that and saying to me that he had three opportunities for me. The first one was to build a marketing team. The second one was to build a marketing team, and the third one was to build a marketing team.
Lots of opportunity, lots of alternatives, right?
Right. Yeah, CEO, that I learned CEOs are like that. They don't give you much choice.
Correct.
If I'm going on too long, Paul, please stop.
No, that's great. That's fascinating, because I think everyone who starts in one area sort of wonders, what does it look like? What does the bridge look like to the other side? And is the other side the dark side, or is the other side a lighter version? And how do you, use these skills from one to another? I think it's fascinating.
Yeah, and in fact, now I teach at a university, and I give this story about the Star Wars, right? So early on, I thought of myself as Luke Skywalker, right? Pure laser, all that sort of stuff. And then going to sales and marketing, and my perception, which I was wrong, was to go to the dark side of Darth Vader, and then ultimately becoming Yoda in the form of teaching. But anyway, so he gave me these three choices, and my natural gut told me that I needed to get out of here. This is crazy. I love engineering. But I thought, and I learned quickly, that it's a good thing to take opportunities that you don't like, you don't want, and to give it a try.
Mm-hmm.
And that's exactly what I did. I loved the company. I loved healthcare. I loved working with customers. And I found out that, particularly in this high tech area, at that point in time of introducing new products and services like CT scanners, MRI scanners to the market.
Right.
Like customers did look to us technical people and sort of ignored the classic sales or marketing people because we built the equipment, we knew what it did. And we were, again, this is my very biased perception, we were by nature pretty honest people. If the system didn't work, we would tell a customer, it doesn't work, you should buy our competitors.
Right.
Anyway, so I wound up building a brand for myself in the marketing areas, and then gradually started evolving from running a clinical science department, becoming a business unit director, becoming vice president of marketing, opening up new businesses, and then ultimately retired as vice president of marketing, which was amazing for a little engineer like me who loved engineers, and then wound up becoming vice president of marketing, actually with very little formal training. Most of mine was done on the job training and by making mistakes.
Right, and you didn't even, it sounds like you didn't even get much of a choice, so it was not like you said, they said, hey, Tom, try this out for a few weeks and see if you're good at it. You had to be good at it, or didn't have to. I suppose you could have changed careers and back to where you were. But what was the hook? What made you a believer that this was the direction that would work for you? What was that element that said, the what I call the aha moment, where you said, wow, this is actually something that I can do, notwithstanding the fact that I don't have a business background, but I have a lot of technical knowledge?
That's a great question. And I often think about this, and I think it comes down to a shift of the love affair, right? So my initial love affair is with technology, and oh yeah, customers are out there, and I understand reports and all that sort of stuff. But as I started working with customers much more and seeing the machines that my team had built actually being used on patients and hearing their pain, I remember distinctly this one machine that we were introducing into the market and seeing a young boy on the table crying, and his mother next to him because he was afraid of all the electronics. And I had young boys at that point in time, and then it finally clicked in my mind, this is what it's about. It's not about the technology. It's about those patients that are on those tables that are coming out better for the experience based on stuff that I did. And so it was a shift of a love affair from technology to customer. It wasn't about business. It wasn't, at least for me, it wasn't about making lots of money. It was, now I get it. It's not that the technology does. And
Right.
I found that I really enjoyed that.
That's fascinating also because, as you evolved in this area, obviously the whole idea of agile has become, sort of mainstream as to getting close to your customer and delivering things incrementally and really understanding that the customer is what it's about. It's not about the technology. It's about what the technology enables. And often, I think, as you were sort of indicating, my experience is often people are deep into the trenches of the technology and they don't know what the business is all about, and they're expected to. It's assumed that you know. Well, it's healthcare. You understand what these machines do. Maybe you don't need to understand the technical elements, but you understand what they do. But you really don't, right? You're just building a component, or you're building maybe you're responsible for the whole thing. So how do you find your passion? I mean, you ended up in healthcare, but you might have ended up in finance. You might have ended up in some other field, aerospace, right? How does someone say, look, I love this field so much that I really want to pursue this field, as opposed to jumping into a new field and a new technology?
So in my particular case, I mean, my dad was a pediatrician, a baby doctor, and my mother was a nurse. So there's some culture there of the love of healthcare. And I grew up in a 3-story house in the middle of Philadelphia. So every single day I would see screams of babies coming into our house because his office was on the first floor and we lived on the second and third floors. And I saw patients come in that couldn't afford, at least in those days, couldn't afford the care. And I could see my father basically saying, that's not really important. And these patients would bring over bushels of food and bushels of wine as a level of appreciation because they couldn't afford it. And I could remember them stopping by on a regular basis and I was there when they did this, and saying that, your dad saved my son's life. When you hear something like that, at least for me, it had a lot of meaning. And that was my first inclination that I didn't want to be a doctor, although I respect that profession, but I wanted somehow to contribute to that as well. So that really had a lot to do with it.
Right.
And even when I was in the engineering department, I understood how important that the customer was. That the very first thing, as I hired engineers, I would tell them, and I can still remember this on day number one. I don't want to know about your electronics and your multi-processors and your software design, all that sort of stuff, because to me, it's irrelevant. That on your very first day, I'm going to send you down into the bowels of New York City, and I want you to sit beside a doctor, and I want you to see the patients as they're coming in, and then I want you to feel the pain. And unless you
Yeah.
feel that pain, I don't need you. And for me anyway, that made a big difference because if engineers got it, they understood that it wasn't about the technology, it was about serving the needs of those who were in pain.
Right. No, and obviously those pain points in healthcare are very visceral. They're very real. They're very physical, often, or mental. But in other fields, they're the same kind of pains, right? It's like I always find it remarkable when you talk to people in a business and they really don't even understand what how the customer uses their product, and how the customer, as I so often says, misuses their product, right? Or
Right.
misuses your intended use, not necessarily misuses, but uses it in a different way. And you find out, wow, there's this basic opportunity for innovation. So in this regard, it sounds like, maybe if I put words in your mouth, is it recommended that someone if they go make a transition, it first starts with understanding the product, right?
Sure, I think so. So whether you're transitioning from a finance department to an HR department, or from company A or company B, one that works in healthcare and one that doesn't work in healthcare, over my years of working, I really convinced myself that if you don't understand what that company is about from the customer's perspective, it's all sort of useless. It's just sort of the mechanics.
Yeah.
The other thing that I really learned along the way, which is just a little twist on this, and I learned this the hard way as well, is that about every 4 or 5 years, I really firmly believe that somebody will come into your office and they're going to knock on your door and ask you to do something that you don't like and you don't want to do. It happened to me at least 5 times in my career, and my normal visceral reaction, like in the case when the CEO said, you want to start a technical marketing group, my response in my stomach anyway, although I didn't say this, was, "Are you nuts?"
Right.
But I have to tell you that every time that person came in the door and asked me to do something I didn't like or didn't want, and I said yes, I came off light years ahead. In my particular career, I usually wind up taking a salary cut. And on 3 occasions I'm thinking about it, I took a $10,000 salary cut.
Mm-hmm.
But what I did was I learned a lot about how the company run and its finances, which I knew nothing about, or learned a lot about marketing and what customers' perception was. And those very short-term dips now turn into long-term gains. And so I would encourage all of your viewers out there, if you're thinking about making transition,
Right.
Don't necessarily go with people that you like or people that tell you that you're really good. Wait for that person to knock on the door and offer you something that you really don't think you're going to like, and give it a try, because you just be surprised.
Yeah, and I think that one of the things I've always been amazed at is that there are, big turns in people's career that they're worried about. And everyone obviously knows today, it used to be that people were in 1 or 2 careers at most, and now people are in dozens, if not, well, many, if not dozens. And it's about, obviously your knowledge. What you've done is put a lot of your courses on our platform and do more and more about engaging people in the healthcare domain, which is obviously where you have existed, but you can apply a lot of the technical skills you learn on a platform to pretty much any domain. But it does come down to, I actually tell this story multiple times, where we were doing training for a big bank and all the technology people were in capital markets, and people at the top thought they all knew about mortgage securities. And no one knew what a mortgage was, no less mortgage securities. And these people were building complicated systems. It's like saying you don't know how someone's going to use a heart monitor. If you don't actually see how they use it, you'll never really appreciate how it should be built.
Yep.
Right? So
the other transition that I made, which was amazing to me, if we're speaking about transition, was that once I retired from Phillips, two things happened. One is that 2 local universities, actually one out there, Paul, in Seattle, University of Washington, and also our university here in Connecticut, the dean of, sorry, that's some reason, the deans of those business schools came to me and said, we want you to, join our faculty, and we want you to teach, in my case, product management. And I had the same, I could still remember, same visceral response that when that CEO came in my office and said, fire all the engineers and I want you to work in marketing. It was like, what are you, nuts? I don't, I mean, yeah, I certainly went to school and I tried to do a good job at it, but I'm the furthest thing from a teacher. And both deans said, well, I'll tell you what, give it a try. What we're looking for is people who've got the scars on their back. And they said, well, I got plenty of scars on my back of things that I did wrong. And they said a lot of these MBA students, in my case, want to hear from somebody who's gone through the trenches. And so, to make a long story short, I transitioned into academic teaching, which my belly told me that I wouldn't like and I didn't want. And I absolutely loved it because it gave me the opportunity to give back to the younger generation those experiences that I had. And I still do that today. And it's not just on healthcare. In fact, I just finished a module on how to negotiate your salary. Mm-hmm. I find students to be very interested. I find students are usually scared in the first units of first job. They think their salaries are non-negotiable. And I thought, well, wouldn't it be neat to put together a module now that nobody can fire me, right? Because I'm retired, semi-retired. They put together a module from the perspective of the person on the other side of the table interviewing. And so I'm in the process of putting that together, which of course we'll upload to your platform if you like.
Yep.
And it's those sorts of experiences that constantly shock me. That's the beauty of life in general. Yep. So I'm really at a phase in my life now where I'm in a give back mode. I'm not out to make tons of money. That's not really important to me. But I really do want to make a difference, help those who could benefit from my experience.
It's often small insights that make big impacts, and then you can take them. If someone believes the small impact or trusts the small impact, they then can jump in deeper with you. I think one of the things also is there are so many people today who have business careers, maybe mid-career business. They know technology is driving most enterprises today. And they're now trying to make a transition in technology, but they're never going to be an engineer like you are. They're never going to have those technical skills because maybe the technologies have moved so fast. But the insights that you offer from a business side to a technologist is powerful as well. So talk a little about what the best way to, as a business person, transition, if you will, if you've had some of that experience, into a business technology role. That is to say, working with customers and technology solutions, understanding their pain, and then communicating that onto the technologists. Like, what is the problem? What is the best way for someone to become expert at that? Communicating a business problem to a technologist who doesn't have really the business expertise.
Well, my opinion is that in the most ideal case, and I understand that many companies can't do this, is to take that technology-driven person and put them in a customer environment so that they can feel the pain of the customer. Because what we're all trying to do as engineers is try to solve some sort of a problem, whether it's for the company, but most often for the customer. Now, obviously, some companies can't afford to take all of their technical staff and give them the opportunity to actually see the customers. Mm-hmm. So I think that it's important for the sales and marketing team and those sorts of folks to continually inform that technology group about the problems that they're trying to solve, but even more importantly, why it's important. Because it's one thing to tap on a technology person, an engineer's head, and say, "Listen, I got a customer and they want this or that, and this is why, and this is the problem we're trying to solve." And I go, "Yeah, okay, yeah, really." But if that same person went to me and said, "Listen, here's why it's so important. If you were in that position, you would want this as well." Mm-hmm. And I think that's important. That's why every opportunity I had to bring the technical people out to the field, I would carry them out there. And frequently, I would, quite honestly, pair them up with a salesperson if I was there, mm-hmm. because in my opinion, there's a natural suspicion between some sales folks and the technology folks, and unless they really spend time together, mm-hmm. they don't understand that they're both extremely important.
Right.
to create value for the company, but also for the customer as well.
It's also business is not one thing. I mean, I use the
Yeah.
example often of Slack. Slack began as a gaming company, and they realized, and I'd like to know who realized. It's kind of be interesting whether the technologists realized that, this gaming thing is not going to really work for us, but document sharing, communications, messaging is really what we do on the platform. Anyway, maybe not document management, but so realizing the opportunity to apply what you've built in another arena is almost de rigueur today. You cannot run a business if not realizing or thinking, hey, maybe this won't work this exact way we've built it, but it might work in a different way. And if I don't understand the customer and I don't understand elements of I stop at saying the technology, but elements of the technology and how it's built and why it's built the way it's built, there's going to be very limited opportunity to pivot. If I understand what we're doing as a business person technically overall, I can at least say, there's another opportunity if we did it this way. And the same, I think, applies for the technologist. Would you agree to that? Or
Yeah, I agree with that 100%. And it actually brings to mind one of the discussions I had when I was working with Pixar. I worked with them for probably 3 years. And they had this slogan, and they drilled it into my head, which I didn't understand until, of course, I was a little more mature, and it was fail often. And so, people look at failure and they go, that's not a good thing. So the people at Pixar and Apple in particular really believed in that. It was in their soul. So they would do some really crazy stuff. And then what they described to me, I can remember them telling me this, it's if you got this product or service that you built and it failed, it's not necessarily that it's a bad product or service. It might have not been ready. It might have been 10 years ahead of the time. It might have been for the wrong market. It might have served the wrong customer. So they said to me, and they're absolutely right, and I did this in my career, you take that, whatever it was, and you put it up on a shelf, a virtual shelf. And then 4 or 5 years from now, you're going to find out that 80% of the stuff that's on those shelves are probably worthwhile reinvestigating for a different problem in a different market, probably at a different time. And that was really powerful for me.
yeah, it's very often that the market's not ready. The technology is a part of a bigger solution that doesn't exist yet. I mean, the communicator in the 1960s from Star Trek was the right concept, but it didn't, and it may have even had conceptually a recorder and maybe a telephone connection, but it didn't have a network. It didn't have lots of people with a network effect using those devices. So you're right. I mean, a lot of these things are put on the shelf and they're dusted off later on and used. And I think deep knowledge of the technology on one side and the business on the other side makes those two things work. What is it like, if you want to, do you think that it's, we sort of address this thing here, it's lonely at the top. Now, in a business context, you're often are alone and you feel like you're not, how do you stay connected to the rest of the team, and how do you, I guess, gain the trust of the rest of the team so that they can work closely with you, I guess, to collaborate closely with you and not feel like you're the enemy?
Yeah, that's a great point. I learned this late in my career. As I mentioned, when I retired from Philips, I didn't mention this on this call, but one of my close friends was president of a healthcare IT firm here in Connecticut, and unfortunately had died in a tragic helicopter crash. So I get this call out of the blue from the Swedish president. Says, will you come in and run my company for me? Now, I'd never been a president in my life. I've been a vice president of a large company. So I came in, and my first experience was exactly what you said, Paul, and that's that when you are a director, a senior director, a vice president, senior vice president, there are a group of people of equal rank, if I can call it, who you can socialize with. You go for a beer outside, and you can complain about the boss and all these sorts of things. The shocking thing for me when I became president of this small company, I was there for 2 years, was that there really isn't anybody to talk to. Because you can't talk to your vice presidents because you know what's going on. I mean, obviously you have business meetings, but when it's the really soul-searching stuff, you really can't talk to them. And so I had to deal with this problem, and that's why I said it's pretty lonely at the top, because you need to draw upon all your experiences in all business segments in order to be successful. And what I did was I relied heavily on a couple of my very close friends' network on places like LinkedIn that I had worked with, who also were in the exact same position many years ago. They were presidents of high-flying, high-tech, innovative firms. And I would meet with them, one in particular, probably every month, and basically bared my soul. Just said, I don't know what I'm doing, whatever it was. And that was of enormous importance. That coaching, that mentorship that I got from a fellow president about how really difficult it was. And it gave me a new respect for senior management, because all of us tend to be a little cynical about senior management. And are they really worth their keep and all these sorts of things? Man, it isn't until you're there that you realize how difficult it is, and the nature of jobs that they have to work with. So and that helped me an enormous amount, this coaching and mentoring.
To me, it's a big gap in general. I think in careers where you get a mentor or find a mentor, someone who will really look after you and suggest that you don't do things. I always use this little joke. When I hurt my finger once, my father, and I said to him, "Dad, it really hurts when I do this." And he looked at it and he goes, "Definitely don't." He was a doctor, by the way, like your father. So he looked at it, he goes, definitely don't do that. Now, often you're stuck in the middle of something. I use it as an example. You're stuck in the middle of something, and it's kind of obvious you shouldn't do that if it hurts, and you shouldn't do something else if it's bad for you. But often you don't know it. You're sitting in the middle of it, and you're deeply immersed in it. I often say sometimes it's like you're building a house and you forgot to put in the front door because you were so concerned about the living room looking wonderful and the kitchen and all the other things. So the components, it's sort of like, again, taking that customer view, taking an outsider view, getting a mentor or getting someone else to say, you might be, if you move this a little bit to the left, you'll get the solution you want. So input, constant communications and input, which is often, I think, lacking at multiple levels, including at senior levels.
Yeah, that's a great point too. And the most important thing I found, and I did a lot of mentoring with students when I was out in Seattle with their MBA mentor program. The important thing, especially if you're a senior executive, is to find somebody who's going to be honest with you. There's a lot of coaches and mentors, that'll pat you on the head, top of the head, and tell you how wonderful you are. What you really need is for somebody to say, no, you think you're pretty, but you're ugly. And let me tell you what your ugliness is.
Right.
And you need, and those sorts of conversations hurt.
Right.
But unless you hurt and realize that, you can never move forward in a career. And that was super useful for me.
Well, Tom, I really appreciate you taking the time. Great to see you again here. And we will see you on our platform, and hopefully we'll do some other live events on the platform as well.
Great. Thank you so much for the opportunity, Paul.
Same here.
See you then.
Take care.